Who say, dude, like, upscalers shouldn't be legal, man. What the fuck? That's crazy. Upscalers are ruining game optimization because they're optimizing the games with upscaling in mind. And I'm like, but what about shitty old hardware that otherwise wouldn't be able to run the game? I love upscaling. Upscaling's cool. Because regular resolution scale only takes you so far. It starts to look real ugly, right? Like, so I've tested like some really bad hardware before, or not bad, but old, right? Because I used to have this computer that I planned on giving away on the channel, but instead I ended up. What did I end up doing with it? I ended up just selling it because that was when like there was the big old bot problem on Twitch. So I didn't know when I actually hit 1,000 followers or when it was bots, because like bots were just like mass following people and then like being banned, right? So then the followers would go away. So I was never sure when I hit 1,000. I wasn't sure when it was gonna naturally happen. So I sold the hardware, right? But in having it, I tested like a bunch of different graphics cards. It came with like it's like an i7 4770K or an i7 4770. I don't think it was a K model. And it came with like a GT 740 or something. And I was like, oh, this is bad. So I tested it. I was like, yeah, let me test out this GT 740. Let me see what it can do and what it can't do. Like, I was like, let me put Paladins on it. Let me try Spellbreak. Let me try Soul Calibur, Tekken, like all the fighting games I had at the time. And another thing I wanted to do was try Fortnite. And I was like, oh, let me try resolution scaling, because at that point there was no upscaling. Let me try resolution scaling. Let me see like what would become playable at 720p or at 1080p. Like how much resolution scale would you have to use without using performance mode, right? Like 50%, 70%, 65%. I think the lowest you can go is actually 25%. If I'm not mistaken. Maybe you can go less, maybe you can go more now, I don't know. But when you did that, the game became an actual legitimate blurry mess that was basically unseeable unless you had a pretty small monitor, right? Like say you're playing on like an 18-inch, a 17-inch monitor on something like that, even like something like a really small portable monitor. Like I have like a 14-inch portable monitor in my backpack. Say you plugged up to that. If you like lowered the render scale or the resolution scale to like 30% of 1080p or 40% of 1080p, you'd probably still be able to see it fine, right? Because of how small because of how small the screen is, right? But if you're doing it on something bigger, if you're doing it on something along the lines of a 24-inch, 21-inch, 27-inch monitor, it's gonna look real blurry. It's gonna look real bad, right? And so AI upscaling that's open source, like FSR, or even TSR for like UE Engine 5 stuff, TSR, and Nvidia DLSS and Intel XeSS, they're really cool technologies because they make it so that hardware that's worse or hardware that's older, that's not up to snuff, can still play these games at moderately playable and actually seeable settings, right? You can put it on like low graphic settings and then leave it at 1080p and just turn it up to like performance FSR or TSR or whatever the upscaler you can use is, right? Like say you have a 3050, you can use something like DLSS performance, right? And the game will become infinitely more playable than it would be without it, right? I don't think a 3050 should not be able to play games because it's equivalent to something like a GTX 1050, I'm sorry, a GTX 1660 or 1660 Ti, somewhere in there. Maybe even slightly better. So it should still be able to play games in the year 2023, no problem. But I think that there's a lot of situations that we don't think about where older hardware, using FSR or using Intel XeSS or ESR or whatever needs to be used, whatever upscaling tech, it makes the game rather playable in a manner that's actually pleasing to look at compared to other things, right? Like, so let's take Fortnite, for example. Performance mode exists, and you could probably just use performance mode for so many of these games. Like, if every game just had, like, a lower than low settings, turns off basically all the textures, shadows do not render, lighting effects don't render, right? And then you take away, like, all bloom effects and all post-processing, and you lower it to the possible lowest bare minimum that the engine can handle without, I don't know, warping the game. Every game could run. Now, unfortunately, not every developer is like, let's just build in a performance mode for people with potato PCs, for people with really bad or really old hardware that want to enjoy our $70, $60 video game. That's where DLSS and FSR and Intel XeSS and TSR come into play. I think they're cool. Me personally, right? I think I use them. I use resolution scaling, or I'm sorry, I use I use those resolution scaling techs in like every game I can. But I think my graphics card could absolutely full on handle 1080p, 60 plus FPS Halo Infinite, but I want more than that. So I set the like minimum resolution to 120, or the minimum frame rate to 120, and the max to 144, right? So what it does is it like downscales the game to try to get to 120 FPS. And it works, especially off stream. Like off stream, I'm sitting between 120 and 144 all the time. On stream, I lose some frames, it goes down to like 100, anywhere between like 80 and 100. Halo Infinite, more like Halo Infinite. I actually really like Halo Infinite. It's like, it was a little content bare, and it's kind of boring for people who want more than just a shooting game, but I think it's a fun little game. Anyways, I'm just mentioning it because it has a really good resolution scaling tech, right? It has like, you choose your targeted frame rate and it lowers the render scale and like upscales it in a way that it doesn't look unpleasant to look at, for the most part. And then it tries to target the target FPS you want. And I think that's dope. And that really matters. I'm gonna be real. That really matters in fighting games. Like explicitly in fighting games, because they necessarily need to run at 60 FPS, or they don't run, and they don't work well for both players, right? You're only really hurting yourself if you can't run a League of Legends, or a Dota, or a Fortnite, a Halo Infinite, a Valorant at over 60 FPS, right? Valorant, you probably want over 100, right? Let's be real. You probably want at least 120 FPS in something like Valorant. But if you're not running these things, if you're not running a fighting game at 60 FPS, it doesn't just hamper your experience, it also hampers your opponent's experience. And that's real bad. And there's nothing we can honestly do about that, because it is network transfer back and forth between two players. There's a server in between for some of these games, but it's not like absorb-based netcode. It's rollback netcode or delay-based netcode. Generally, we don't want delay-based, right? I'm gonna turn that down a little bit. Generally, we don't want delay-based, but some of these games still have it, including Tekken 8. I'm almost certain Tekken 8 has delay-based netcode. Hey, yo, what up? How you doing, Creeper? I'm just talking about upscaling tech right now. So the more fighting games that potentially are going to come out in like big 3D rendered engines, like something like a UE5, right? So there's a Soul Calibur 7 down the line. I wouldn't want a game like a Soul Calibur 7 or a Tekken 8 to come out without having upscaling tech. Especially if you're going to be using UE5, one's built into UE5, TSR specifically, right? But UE5 also can handle DLSS and FSR. They're used, right? A game that I play, or have played, that's the Creeper forgetting for me, is Remnant 2. And Remnant 2 has like every upscaling tech across the board. It has Intel, XeSS, it has DLSS, FSR. It has all three. I don't know if it has TSR, but it has all three of the major branded ones from AMD, Intel, and Nvidia. And they all do a lot for that game because it's kind of a stutter fest otherwise. Waiting on mom to get a hospital bed so I can go home? I'm tired of her shit? Wow. That's not a good way to put that. You're like, she's in a hospital, but I want to go home. I have to visit my mom and grandma. I need to go visit them. Without some of these tech, I think there'd be a lot less people on PC that would be able to game, right? They'd have to spend more money to build new rigs or upgrade components that maybe right now they just can't afford, right? You guys probably think I'm like a big advocate for more people having to spend more money for a good experience. I'm halfway, right? Like, I want people to pay for what, like, you get what you pay for. But I think if developers are gonna, like, if it's free software, you should just put it in the game. It's free software. There's no reason for it not to exist in the game. If you want to not use it, that's totally fine, right? The argument is that people assume that games are built with upscaling tech in mind, and without them, the games won't run properly. There are some, but not all, right? And what hinders people from wanting to use it is, you know, the image quality isn't as good as native, or the amount of extra performance you get isn't worth the image quality loss, whatever. So for those people, if that's how you feel, then more than likely you should just upgrade your hardware so you don't have to worry about using upscaling tech. But if you can't afford that, at least you can still play the games you want because the upscaling tech exists. It's nice software, and I'm glad it exists. Do I think it's for everyone? No. But do I think the target audience of people who need it is bigger than the people who don't? Yes, absolutely. There are way more people on bad hardware than there are on good hardware. And I'm sure we all know that. I'm sure we can all agree that most people's PCs are worse than... Like, people are like, PC is better than console. And then you turn around and you look at them and you ask them, but is your PC better than the console? And they're gonna like, no, it's not. Generally, no, it's not. Like, maybe it's better than the Series S, right? Or the PS4 or Xbox One, but I'm damn sure most people's PCs aren't better than an Xbox Series X or PS5. So these upscaling technologies, if they help with console, they help with your crappy PC too. Don't be afraid to use upscaling tech. It's the future. I mean, if you don't want to use it, spend $2,000 on a PC. But if you can't, use it and get used to it and kind of embrace it, because it means that you're able to play games in the future that otherwise you wouldn't be able to.